Well, good morning, everyone. The Parliament of World Religions is an interfaith event that is held every 3 years in different locations around the world. And 5 of us traveled from this area to Toronto, Hank and Joan Breckling, Andrew and Deidre Ashmore, and me. And we shared an Airbnb, we were all roomies for that week, and attended the Parliament at the Toronto Convention Centre. And I have to tell you that Toronto was an excellent choice for this event. And here's why. It happens to be the most multicultural city in the entire world. Did you know that? I knew that it was in Canada. I found out there that it's the entire world. And it's so apparent to you as you walk down the street. It is such a multicultural place. The very first Parliament was held in 1893, and Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, Unity's co-founders, were in attendance at that event. Then 100 years later, 1993, as a commemorative event, a second Parliament was held, and since then, every 3 years, there's another one. And this was my second Parliament that I attended. Gary and I went to Melbourne, Australia 6 years ago to attend that one. Now, the estimate of attendees from around the world ranged from 7,500 to 10,000, hence the name of today's talk. Now, I did not hear the final count, but suffice it to say there were a whole lot of us there. A whole lot of us, and many New Thought delegates. Unity is part of the New Thought movement. There were upwards of 200 of us there, and these are just a few of those folks. Now, there was one thing that struck me right from the very beginning of this Parliament, and that was the fact that this huge number of multi-generational, multicultural people who had gathered together, all different races, ethnicities, interests, and faith traditions, had a very important commonality, and that was a desire to bring forth a better world. That was an agreement point that everyone shared. A desire for a planet that's safe for all who dwell upon it, a clean and healthy environment for our children and our families, a loving world based on the golden rule, one that blesses all of life. And whether the individual focus was climate change or peace and justice, healing violence, feeding people, children's education, animal rights, whatever it was, no matter what, the desire behind it all was to make the world a better place, to follow and live what's known as the global ethic. Now, the global ethic, the Declaration Toward a Global Ethic, is a 15-page document that you can get online that contains common ethical commitments that are foundational to all traditions. And if you're interested, you can go to parliamentofworldreligions.org. You can read it, and you can sign on to it if that's something you want to support. And it was read in its entirety as part of the closing ceremonies. It was very moving to hear that, to hear what our common connection was all about. Now, some of the highlights for me of going to the Parliament, well, of course, a trip to Canada is always a highlight in my life. It's always a delight. Toronto used to be my old stomping grounds, you know. I grew up about an hour west of there, and so we would often journey to the big city for a night out or to go shopping. Or if you remember a few weeks back, I shared that I used to do concert security. It was always in Toronto that happened. Now, we happened to be there during one of the most momentous events of the year. Are you ready? It was the unveiling of the Hudson's Bay Company Christmas store windows. Now, this is such a big deal that they even reroute the buses that are traveling by that store the night before it's going to be unveiled because they're putting down the blinds that have been up. And so they actually reroute the buses. Now, I found this out the hard way as I was standing waiting for the bus to take me home in the pouring rain, but that's a whole other story. Lots of rain. That's what I remember about that week, walking in the rain. Now, a very exciting moment for me was attending the interviewing of one of my personal Canadian heroes, and that is Margaret Atwood. How many of you have heard of her? She is often referred to as Canada's national treasure. She's a writer and an activist. She's the author of The Handmaid's Tale, if any of you have followed that. So that was a real highlight for me to hear her being interviewed. Joan and I led an Alternatives to Violence Project workshop at the Parliament. And we gave people some background on what it was, and then we gave them a taste of what it was like. We took them through some of the activities, and then we gave them information, and affirmation, we did that too, information on how they could also get involved. So it was very exciting to be a part of sharing that with some of the people that were there. So I'm going to pass this on to Hank for his, oh, I'll keep this, that's right. I'll give you this.
Thank you, Jane. There we go. Gary Warren, I got to speak into it. So I just want to start by talking about how it was I got to the Department of Religions. I'm generally not drawn to being at large events, and I'm not real fond of crowds. I don't really like big cities to speak of. So I'm off to Toronto, Canada, going to another country and the whole thing. And it was a guidance thing. I wouldn't have gone because I was clearly guided to go do this. Was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago that you went to 3? I remember wrong. So it was 3 years ago that Joan went to Salt Lake City for the Parliament there. And she was just kind of blown away by it, and it just really kind of lit her up. And I thought, well, that sounds like a wonderful thing. So for me, it was, going to this event was a transformational experience. From the getting there, to the living there, to the getting back, was challenging, but it was also part of the process. And it was intense for us, because this is a really busy time of the year for me personally. I sing in a group called Chorale Coeur d'Alene, and I also production manager for that, and it keeps me very busy this time of year. And so the day that we came back from the Parliament, the next day I had to sing in a concert, one of our fall concerts, and the day after that, and be responsible for taking it down and setting it up and all that stuff, and then on and on and the thing. And when I looked at this trip originally, and I thought, oh man, it's like we went to Europe a number of years ago, and it was 3 weeks, and I knew that was going to be a trip, and I was really sick when I went, and I came back even sicker, but I made it through. And another story, but that's all healed now. But anyway, when I went to this, I thought, I'm going to be so tired when I get home from this, and I wasn't. It was like I caught this wave, and the energy at the Parliament was part of that. Other things were a part of it, and I came back and I went through it, and it was an incredibly wonderful experience on many levels. A lot of that level was being connected with people like you, people who beam the light, who hold the light, and it was just really wonderful to be with however many it was. I remember we went to the opening ceremony, and this is a giant convention center, and this room that, I guess there must have been 10,000 chairs in this room, and it wasn't totally full, but it was about 3/4 full anyway on the opening ceremony. Just this mass of people who are all there for the same purpose, and that was to connect with God in their own way, to find that for themselves. So there was just a powerful energy to begin with. For me, the thing, and when I went, I had no idea what I was going to do. There's an app for this thing for the Parliament that you could use, and there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of offerings on there every day. At one time period, there'd be 40 different offerings that you could go to, so you really had to be selective about what you chose to do. From the time I got there, I was instantly drawn to going to things relating to the First Nations people of Canada. And if you don't know that term, that's Native Americans in Canada. And they were front and center in the whole process of the Parliament. They opened the Parliament with drumming and singing and sort of a mini powwow, and closed it that way too. And they were acknowledged by the opening people who, from the Parliament, when they opened it, they said, we recognize that we are holding this on sacred grounds of whatever the tribe was. Remember the name of the tribe. But anyway, they were there front and center, and they had this really strong presence throughout the event. There was a teepee in front of the building at one point where they actually kept the fire burning the whole time to sort of hold the energy for that. And they had just many wonderful different offerings. The thing that I was drawn to do was to go see these movies that were created, and two of them that I saw. One was by a young woman who had been in a residential school. I don't know if you know that term, but in the 1800s, our country started this, and actually Canada came to the U.S. to find out how to do this, to deal with the, quote, Indian problem at the time, which was how to get rid of them, basically. And so they created these residential schools where children were taken from their parents and their family and put in these schools and stripped of their culture. And couldn't speak their language. They were taught, most of these were run by the Catholic Church and some by Protestant churches, but they were basically stripped of their culture, tried to convert them to be Christians and all that. And just horrible things happened in that process. And so I saw one film where a young woman talked about her experience with that. She was only in it, and she was in it in the 60s for 4 years, from the time she was 5 years to the time she was 9. And she was able to heal herself by becoming an artist, and she actually did heal it, and the film was about that. And then I saw another film that was actually produced by Clint Eastwood called Indian Horse. And I won't go into the details, because believe me, you don't want to hear them, but it was just graphic detail of all the horrible things that happened and to the Native American people. And you look at this and you wonder, how could people survive this? But they did. And the cool thing about it is that what I learned through this process, there were discussion groups after both films, is that the Native American people, the First Nations people in Canada, came forth on their own to the government and said, we need to heal this, we need to reconnect. And that has happened in Canada. And in 2006, they created a National Reconciliation Commission. And that came up with 94 action points, ways to bridge the gap between Native Americans in Canada and the government and the people of Canada. And one of those being rewriting of history, to tell the true history. And so there's just this wonderful, and they're recognized now, and there's this huge difference in the way they are related to than in this country. There's still, Joan and I started this organization called One Piece, Many Paths, and we started a Native, non-Native talking circle about 6 years ago, and to try to bridge the gap in this country between Native and non-Native cultures. And we work on that constantly, doing that. But there's still this huge gap here, and it's something I will continue to work on. But in Canada, they've got it going on, and they've got it right, and they have people who really work towards this, and the whole nation as a whole is more inclusive that way. And when Jane said that Toronto was the most diverse country, first city in the world, their motto for the city is not, we like diversity, we want people to come. It's diversity is our strength. Diversity is our strength. And if you think about it a minute, our country, e pluribus unum, means in many one. And that's what our country was founded on. And we kind of lost that, A lot of people haven't lost it, but our government has lost it. And so it's deep in my heart to heal that, to get back to let through many one, because in our diversity is the strength. We're all creations of God. We're all this unique thing. So anyway, that was a large time when I focused on that when I was at the Parliament. The thing that impacted me most was in the closing ceremonies, there was a young woman who was a whirling dervish. Everybody familiar with whirling dervish? What a whirling dervish is? Yeah, Sufi faith, and they basically are mystics, and they have this process where they stand in one spot and they just spin. And they spin. And she had these beautiful red flowing robes and veils over her face and everything, and started with her hair up. And so she just appeared on the stage, and she just started there, and then this music came on that was just kind of this ethereal, but also really kind of grounding and beautiful music, just kind of repetitive over and over and over. And so as I began to watch this, and they didn't say what she was going to be doing, they just announced her name, but as I watched it, I sat there watching, and I thought, well, this is interesting, I wonder what this is going to be. She just started turning. She just kept turning. And she did this for between 10 and 15 minutes. And I don't know if you're familiar with people who are dancers, professional dancers, but when people do, or ice skaters, when they turn, they basically pick a focal point, and then they spin their head, and every time they come back to the focal point so they don't get dizzy. She didn't do that. She was just spinning around and staying perfectly centered. And I kept thinking, is she going to make it? It's like she kept, but she stayed within a space of about like that. But what happened in the process was this incredible experience. This energy came forth through her and everyone, and it was just lit me up. It was just one of the greatest senses of love I've ever had, and it came forth through everyone, and it was this feeling of home. It was feeling of where we're all trying to get back to. And she just sat there and gently held the space and did these movements and brought forth this process. It was absolutely wonderful. So that was a big thing. I wanted to, before I stop, I want to just thank Jane. A year ago, when we were looking for an Airbnb for us to live in, we'd come Joan had found two possibilities for us to be, because, so we sat down with Jane and looked at him, and she looked at the two and she said, well, you don't want to be in that area, it's too much city. So she found the one we were, and it was just a wonderful place to live. And her having it be in your stomping grounds before was just very helpful, because it was a very nice place. But the other thing I wanted to say before I go is that we walked 20-some miles in the time we were there. We had to take a trolley as far as it would go, then we had to walk about 10 to 15 minutes, so we figured we walked about 20-some miles. I'd never thought about doing that in a week. I don't usually walk more than that in my life, but anyway. So, but when I came back, I did take a walk. I was a lot stronger. So anyway, it was a wonderful experience, a transformational one for me and for each of us in our own ways. Thank you.
So, as Hank mentioned, I started this journey with the Parliament 3 years ago when it was in Salt Lake City. The experience in Salt Lake and Toronto were quite different. Those cities are very different. But the experience at the Parliament itself carried so many of the same energies that was what drew me back this time. For me, that week in Toronto was a time of experiencing and appreciating the immense diversity of our world. There was art, there was music, there was dance, there was film, the way people dressed, the foods, the langar that Jane mentioned where we were. Or have you mentioned that yet? She's going to mention that. That was a wonderful thing. And just many expressions of what it means to be spiritual. But even more overarching than that for me was that every person I met and every workshop I attended was there to discover and affirm our common humanity and our innate capacity for understanding and compassion. It was just everywhere you went. It was a very safe, loving place to be amongst these thousands of people from all over the world. It often happened in unexpected ways. I had these just pick-up conversations with a Hindu man from India, a Sufi Muslim from Jordan, and a young woman from Mauritius. And we never even got to what our faith communities were. We just connected. A theme that has emerged from Unity's Western Region Youth Team is better together. And that encapsulates in 2 words my takeaway from the Parliament. I attended a lot of different kinds of workshops. So one of the areas that I was interested in was going to workshops that were presented by and sometimes about millennials, which emphasized the importance of establishing connections, dialogue, and projects between young people and elders to create together a world that works for all. This photo is a picture of a workshop that was called Speed Faithing instead of speed dating. And it was just a wonderful experience where you were in a small group of 3 or 4 people and they had these topics on the wheel and they had a question for each topic. So they spun the wheel and they'd tell us the question, then that group would discuss that topic and then you were on to the next one. And so there was just such diversity in the things I did. I attended a film and heard speakers focusing on overcoming our tendency toward othering, which is a term now that's being used to talk about how we distance ourselves or separate ourselves from those that we perceive as different from ourselves. There was one woman who was a refugee, and she shared a deeply moving poem that expressed her felt experience of someone who's been forced to leave their homeland. And she described that her country had become like a shark's mouth. It was just very powerful. Another woman shared about her autistic son, who was withdrawn and totally uncommunicative. He had not spoken. He didn't seem to, there was no way for him to write. They eventually found him the technology so that he had a communication board. And this is he has a great deal to say. He has a sense of mission in his life. He just all of a sudden started communicating in a way that no one could imagine he was even capable of thinking. So I want to read this to you. It might not be easy to see. He said, his name is Payam, and he's a teenager. And he wrote, "My dream is for the entire world to abolish the pain those experience from unnecessary judgments because of each person's unique differences. People need to recognize how their attitudes are negatively impacting our growth for humanity as a whole." So, That presentation really made me wonder how often I look past someone, not noticing that they may have just some incredible wisdom for me. In our own journeys toward oneness, there are so many opportunities to kind of slip into that pattern of othering. But mindfulness, openness, empathy, and compassion are our way out of othering. Two other major themes relating to Better Together emerged in the sessions I attended at the Parliament. The first one was related to interfaith alliances. And this photo, it's a little hard to see, but all across the stage there are people. These are all the people who are from the ambassadors for the Parliament from around the world, who are working between the parliaments to get ready for the next one and working in their own countries on their own efforts. It's truly an interfaith alliance. And so the emphasis really was on people everywhere needing to join together across diverse faith communities, partly for the purpose of really greater understanding and establishing mutual respect, but also for making a positive impact on our communities together. One statement that has stuck with me about the interfaith work is that it is no longer optional. It's no longer kind of a luxury for a faith community to get involved in interfaith work, but that it's an essential piece now of how we're going to deal with all of the polarization and the divisions in our world. So again, better together. One area greatly in need of joined interfaith work is dealing with the environment, of protecting and restoring it. There's a lot of emphasis on that in a number of the presentations at the Parliament, because it affects every living being on our planet. I'd like to share a few thoughts from a workshop that I went to with Matthew Fox, who is a renowned Christian theologian. He is a Catholic priest, but he left the priesthood because his ideas were a bit too radical for the church that he was in. And he continues to be radical in his 80s. He has actually founded an Order of the Sacred Earth with two millennials who are not particularly religious but are very spiritual. It's something to look up online if you're interested. But here's what he said. He said, Mother Earth is being marginalized and mistreated just as we marginalize and mistreat the poor. He said, our transformation requires us to bring back the sacred, to find the sacred in all of life. And we will neither love nor save what we do not hold as sacred. And then he said, love your neighbor also means loving the air, the oceans, the mountains, the trees, the animals. We need to shift to a new paradigm, which I know we here and are working on here. There is no such thing as a Christian sun, a Jewish moon, a Muslim river, a non-religious mountain. We're all in this together. And in order to change systems, a shift in consciousness is required, rooted in group action. It's time to take seriously and personally the often repeated words, be the change that you want to see in the world. That those are so much more than words, that as each one of us takes that in personally in our every thought and action, we are contributing to being that change. So while at the Parliament, I also explored a number of ideas that we might be able to make use of here at Unity. Our mission here speaks to transforming lives and making a positive difference in the world. Engaging more intentionally in interfaith and environmental work in our own area, in our own region, may be avenues for our Unity community to explore. So I would like to invite you, if you are interested in joining in or leading in such an exploration around more active involvement with interfaith or environmental health, please speak to me or Jane, and we will find people who are interested, and perhaps something will happen. I was also able to glean a number of new ideas for our youth ministry program, because that's something that's near and dear to my heart. And I wanted to share one specific project with you, which we actually have already started. It's called Mats of Love, and our 3rd through 8th graders so far are getting involved in creating a mat that is made of plastic bags and is used and made available then to someone who is homeless either here or in a developing country. This started in Canada. The people who are organizing it have collected all of these mats. You can see them in the photo. They make children's mats and adult mats, and so we are collecting what we're using at this point, and we may find some other kinds of plastics we can use. Right now we are starting with the wrappers from the newspaper, from the Spokesman Review. So we're asking, we really need your help in bringing this into manifestation, because we need maybe 1,000, 1,500 of these bags. So this is going to take us a while. But what we ask is that you bring them dry and if you can, flattened, and then we will they'll be our raw material for creating the mat that we're making. And we'll keep you posted on how that's going. And if you have another source of a heavier plastic or an idea for that, please share it with me, because we're just at the beginning of this process. But no plastic, particularly grocery bags. They're just too stretchy and they just won't work. So thank you for that. Finally, I'd like to leave you with the words of Swami Chidanand Saraswati, who you see on the screen. He's a renowned Hindu spiritual leader from India. He's initiated efforts to restore the health of the Ganges River, and he also was the one who began the first UNICEF alliance of world religious leaders that were working for water, sanitation, and hygiene improvement. The Swami shared these thoughts at the closing plenary of the Parliament. When I first saw him come on stage, he looked like kind of a wild guy, and I thought, this will be interesting. And he just is a man with an incredibly big heart and clearly wonderful capabilities. So here's what he said. He said, change must come from each of us. We must create heaven right here. There is no planet B. Water is essential to life and peace and sacred to all religions. While we have shortages of water, food, peace, one of the most important shortages is a shortage of global consciousness. And finally, with one another, let us be juicy, juicy, lovey, lovey, and huggy, huggy.
And that is a direct quote. I was there when he was saying exactly that. So as I mentioned, the week began for me with the understanding that we were all there to join forces to bring forth a better world. But the final aha came to me just because of a change of one word. And that word was from for to through. The wording of the New Thought mission for the Association of Global New Thought used to read, creating a world that works for all. We've heard this many times. It now has shifted to creating a world that works through all. Do you see the difference? Do you feel the difference in that? It's very subtle and very profound. And does this sound familiar to you from any talks you may have heard recently? This whole idea that Dr. Gary's been working with about living life as if life is happening to us, and then moving to by us, and then through us, and finally as us. And this is what the new Association of Global New Thought mission is now saying. So it's not just about making the world a better place, it's also empowering all of us in our evolutionary path to be the ones to welcome it into being. Isn't that cool? Yes. It really is. It's exciting. Through us and as us. And there are many people hearing this clarion call to bring this reality into manifestation, being guided by the global ethic, following it in their own way, being inspired into action through the awakening of an evolutionary impulse from within. We are not alone in this. And whether it was through the interchange of peace ribbons, which is what that in the top left-hand corner is about, or the sharing of prayer in the bottom right, quilts for peace, the top right, just this beautiful, beautiful peace quilt, or serving food. Our Sikh brothers and sisters, the Toronto Sikhs, fed 8,000 people a free vegetarian lunch every single day as their blessing. So the projects were endless and varied, but the energy was the same, being the change and facilitating the greater emergence of a world that works for all. However, one is inspired to do that. And as each one of us joins that calling, taking heart-inspired action, we eventually reach critical mass, where this new paradigm of integral living comes into manifestation. And I saw in front of my eyes it happening at this Parliament. So the greatest gift I received at the Parliament of World Religions was an inspired realization and confirmation that the work we're doing here at Unity Spiritual Center is right on track. It's right on track with what's happening in the greater New Thought movement and in the planet, on the planet. We are not alone in our desire to transform our lives and the world. And this is just the beginning, the gathering of the 10,000. And so it is.